David had been dreaming about this moment for 5 years. Standing in front of his new house with the keys in his hand, he couldn't help but smile. The house wasn't huge, but it was his. After working double shifts as a computer programmer and saving every penny he could, he finally made it happen. The neighborhood looked like something out of a magazine. Every lawn was perfectly cut. The houses all had fresh paint and clean driveways. Big oak trees lined the streets and everything felt peaceful and safe. This was exactly what David had been working toward. A place where he could finally relax and enjoy the fruits of his hard work. He'd grown up in a rough part of town where you had to watch your back constantly. His mom had worked 3 jobs just to keep food on the table. She always told him that education was his ticket out, and she was right. Now, at 32, he was a successful software developer with his own home in one of the city's nicest neighborhoods. The moving truck arrived right on schedule. David had hired professionals because he wanted everything to go smoothly. As the movers started unloading his furniture, he noticed someone watching from across the street. A woman in her 50s stood at her window, partially hidden behind white curtains. Every time David looked her way, the curtains would quickly close. Curious neighbor, he thought to himself. Probably just wants to see who's moving in. Crow, woman eventually came outside. She wore a crisp white blouse and perfectly pressed khaki pants. Her gray hair was styled in a way that screamed, "I want to speak to your manager." She walked across the street with the confidence of someone who owned the entire block. "I'm Patricia," she announced, not bothering with pleasantries like, "hello," or "welcome to the neighborhood." Her voice was sharp and businesslike. "I'm the HOA compliance officer for this community." David set down the box he was carrying and extended his hand. "Nice to meet you, Patricia. I'm David. Just moving in today." She looked at his outstretched hand for a moment before giving it the weakest handshake he'd ever experienced. Her eyes immediately started scanning his property like she was looking for violations. "I hope you've read the homeowner association rules," she said, pulling out a thick folder from seemingly nowhere. "There are very specific guidelines about everything: lawn maintenance, exterior colors, parking regulations, noise ordinances. This is a quality community and we intend to keep it that way." David took the folder, which felt like it weighed 5 pounds. "Of course. I'm sure everything will be fine. I'm pretty low-key." Patricia's eyes narrowed slightly. "We'll see about that. The previous owners were adequate, but sometimes new residents don't understand how things work around here. They think they can do whatever they want just because they bought a house." The way she said "they" made David's skin crawl. He'd heard that tone before. It was the same way his elementary school principal used to talk about certain families in the neighborhood. "Well, I'm sure we'll get along just fine," David said, trying to keep things friendly. "I work a lot, so I'll probably be pretty quiet." "What kind of work?" Patricia asked, her tone suggesting she already disapproved. "I'm a software engineer. I work mostly from home, developing applications for businesses." Patricia looked surprised, like this wasn't the answer she expected. "From home? That means there will be increased traffic. Delivery trucks, clients coming and going, business meetings." David shook his head. "Actually, no. It's all done remotely. Maybe the occasional package delivery, but that's about it." "Packages," Patricia repeated, like the word tasted bad in her mouth. "Well, make sure your deliveries don't create clutter on your porch. This isn't that kind of neighborhood." Before David could respond, Patricia turned on her heel and marched back to her house. She paused at her front door and looked back at him one more time before going inside. "Okay then," David muttered to himself. That was interesting. The moving crew finished unloading everything by late afternoon. David tipped them well and started the long process of unpacking. As he worked, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Every time he looked toward Patricia's house, he caught glimpses of movement behind her windows. His next-door neighbor turned out to be much friendlier. Tom was a retired teacher who came over with a 6-pack of beer and a genuine smile. "Welcome to the neighborhood," Tom said. "Don't mind Patricia. She takes the HOA stuff pretty seriously, but she means well." David cracked open a beer and sat on his front steps with Tom. "She seems intense," Tom laughed. "That's one way to put it. She's been here longer than anyone else. Bought her house when this development first opened 20 years ago. Since then, she's made it her personal mission to keep everything just so. Some people appreciate it, others find it a bit much. "What's her deal with packages?" David asked. "Oh, she's big on curb appeal. Thinks anything sitting on a porch for more than a few hours makes the neighborhood look messy. She's been known to leave notes if someone's Amazon delivery sits out too long." David nodded, filing that information away. "Good to know." Over the next few days, David settled into his new routine. He'd wake up, make coffee, and start work in his home office. The neighborhood was indeed quiet during the day. Most people seemed to work traditional jobs, so the streets were empty until evening. But he couldn't shake the feeling that Patricia was keeping tabs on him. Her house had a perfect view of his front door and driveway. Whenever he left for groceries or went for a run, he'd see her curtains move. When he came back, there she was again. On his fourth day in the house, David was working in his yard when Patricia appeared again. This time she had a measuring tape. "Your grass is getting a bit long," she announced, walking right onto his property, without permission. David looked at his lawn. He'd literally mowed it 3 days ago. "It looks fine to me." Patricia was down on her hands and knees with the measuring tape. HOA rules state that grass cannot exceed 3 inches in height. This is approaching 3¼ David stared at her in disbelief. "You're measuring my grass?" "I'm ensuring compliance with community standards," she replied curtly. "I'll give you until tomorrow to address this issue." She stood up, brushed off her knees, and walked away without another word. That evening, David called his friend Rico, who'd grown up in the same neighborhood and now worked as a police officer. "Man, you've got yourself a real piece of work there," Rico said after David described his new neighbor. "Some people just need to control everything around them. Probably feels like she owns the whole street." "I just want to live peacefully," David said. "I'm not looking for any trouble." "You're not causing trouble by existing in your own house," Rico reminded him. "But people like that sometimes need to be reminded where the boundaries are." David hoped it wouldn't come to that. He was tired of conflict. He'd worked too hard to get here to let one difficult neighbor ruin his dream home. Little did he know, Patricia was just getting started. 3 weeks into living in his new house, David started noticing something strange. His packages were disappearing. Started small. He'd ordered a phone charger that never showed up even though the tracking said it was delivered. Then a book he'd ordered for work vanished. At first, David figured it was just bad luck. Maybe the delivery driver left packages at the wrong house, or maybe someone walking by grabbed them. But then it got worse. David had ordered a new laptop for a client project. It was expensive, nearly $2,000, and he'd specifically requested signature confirmation. The tracking showed it was delivered at 2:30 p.m. on a Tuesday. David was home all day working in his office, which had a clear view of the front door. He never heard a knock. He never saw a delivery truck. When he went outside to check, there was nothing there. David immediately called the shipping company. The driver insisted he'd delivered the package and gotten a signature. But David knew he hadn't signed for anything. Something was seriously wrong. He decided to install a doorbell camera. If packages were being stolen, he wanted to catch whoever was doing it. The camera was easy to set up and gave him a clear view of his entire front porch and part of the street. For a few days, nothing happened. David started to relax, thinking maybe the thief had moved on to easier targets. Then he ordered a new office chair. The delivery truck arrived around noon. David was on a work call, so he couldn't go to the door immediately. But he wasn't worried because now he had the camera recording everything. 20 minutes later, when his call ended, David went to check on his package. It was gone. His heart pounding, David rushed to his computer to check the camera footage. What he saw made his blood boil. The delivery driver had left the package at 12:15 p.m. At 12:32 p.m., Patricia walked across the street, looked around to make sure no one was watching, picked up David's package, and carried it back to her house like she owned it. David watched the footage 3 times to make sure he wasn't seeing things. There was no doubt about it. His neighbor, the HOA compliance officer who lectured him about community standards, was stealing his packages. He saved the video file and marched across the street to Patricia's house. His hands were shaking with anger as he rang her doorbell. Patricia answered the door with the same stern expression she always wore. "What do you want?" "You took my package," David said, trying to keep his voice calm. "I have video proof." Patricia's face didn't change. "I don't know what you're talking about. I just watched you walk across the street and take a package off my porch. Where is it?" "You're mistaken," Patricia said flatly. "I've been inside all day. Maybe you should check with other neighbors. This isn't the safest neighborhood for leaving packages unattended." David couldn't believe what he was hearing. She was looking him straight in the eye and lying. "I have it on camera," he repeated. "Clear video of you taking my package." Patricia stepped back and started closing the door. "If you continue harassing me, I'll call the police and report you to the HOA for disturbing the peace." The door slammed in David's face. David stood there for a moment, stunned. He'd caught her red-handed, and she was still denying it. Worse, she was threatening him. He went home and called the police non-emergency number. The dispatcher told him an officer would come out to take a report. Officer Martinez arrived 2 hours later. David showed him the camera footage, explained what had happened, and pointed to Patricia's house. "That's pretty clear evidence," Martinez said after watching the video. "But I have to ask, are you sure you didn't give her permission to collect your packages? Maybe some kind of arrangement you forgot about?" David stared at the officer. "Why would I give her permission to take my packages and then call you to report them stolen?" Martinez shrugged. "Sometimes neighbors help each other out, and there are misunderstandings. Have you tried talking to her about it?" "Yes, I just did. She denied taking it and threatened to call the police on me." "Well," Martinez said, "technically this would be theft, but it's a pretty minor amount. And if she says it's a misunderstanding..." David felt his frustration building. "Officer, I'm showing you video evidence of someone stealing my property. How is this a misunderstanding?" "Look, I'll go talk to her, see what she says. Maybe we can work this out without pressing charges." Martinez walked across the street and knocked on Patricia's door. David watched from his window as they talked for about 10 minutes. Patricia was animated, gesturing toward David's house and shaking her head. When Martinez came back, his attitude had changed. "She says you've been harassing her since you moved in. Says you accused her of stealing before without any proof. She thinks you're trying to make trouble for her because she's been enforcing HOA rules." "That's complete nonsense," David said. "I showed you the video." "She says the video doesn't show what you think it shows. Says she was checking on the package because it looked like it might get stolen, and she was going to bring it to you." David felt like he was losing his mind. "Then where's my package?" "She says she never took any package. Says you must be confused about what the video shows." Martinez closed his notepad. "Look, this seems like a neighbor dispute more than a criminal matter. I'd suggest you try to work things out between yourselves. Maybe consider getting a P.O. box if package theft is a problem in this area." After the officer left, David sat in his kitchen trying to process what had just happened. He had clear video evidence of theft, and somehow the police officer was treating him like the problem. He called his friend Rico for advice. "Man, that's messed up," Rico said after David explained the situation. "But it happens more than you'd think. Sometimes officers don't want to deal with neighbor disputes, especially over small amounts. They figure people should work it out themselves." "But this isn't a dispute," David said. "It's theft. I have proof." I know. But unless she admits it or you catch her with the stolen goods, it becomes a he said, she said situation. And if she's been in the neighborhood longer, some cops might give her the benefit of the doubt." David felt sick. "So she can just keep stealing my stuff?" "Not necessarily. Keep recording everything. If you can build up a pattern of evidence, it becomes harder to ignore. And maybe try putting the camera somewhere she can't see it. If she knows she's being recorded, she might change her tactics." That night, David installed a second camera in his upstairs window. It was hidden behind a plant but gave him a perfect view of both his front porch and Patricia's house. 2 days later, David ordered a small package just to test his theory. Sure enough, Patricia struck again. This time, the hidden camera caught her checking his front door for cameras before taking the package. She even looked directly at his doorbell camera and waved like she was taunting him. David called the police again. This time a different officer responded. Officer Johnson seemed more interested in the evidence, but the result was the same. It's a low-value theft, Johnson explained. Even with video evidence, the prosecutor might not want to pursue it. These things often get pled down to a misdemeanor, and she'd probably just get probation. So there's no consequences for stealing? David asked. I didn't say that, I'm just managing your expectations. You could file charges, but it might not go anywhere. David felt defeated. He'd worked his whole life to afford this house, and now, he couldn't even get his mail delivered safely. But Patricia wasn't done. Over the next week, she escalated her campaign against David. He started getting official letters from the HOA about various violations. His trash can was out 15 minutes, too early. His car was parked 6 inches too close to the property line. His mailbox needed cleaning. Every letter was signed by Patricia in her role as compliance officer. David realized this wasn't just about packages anymore. Patricia was trying to make his life miserable, and she was using her position in the HOA to do it. He needed a new strategy. David thought he was being smart when he decided to take his evidence directly to the HOA board. If Patricia was abusing her position as compliance officer, surely the other board members would want to know about it. The monthly HOA meeting was held in the community center on a Thursday evening. David had never been to one before, but he figured this was the right place to address his concerns professionally. He walked into a room where about 15 people sat in folding chairs. Patricia sat at a table in the front with 4 other board members. When David entered, every conversation stopped. All eyes turned to him. "We have a new attendee tonight," announced Gerald, the HOA president. He was a tall, thin man in his 60s who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Would you like to introduce yourself?" David stood up. "I'm David. I live at 1247 Oak Street. I moved in about a month ago." "Welcome," Gerald said with a forced smile. "Any particular reason you're joining us tonight?" David looked around the room. Everyone was staring at him, and not in a friendly way. He suddenly felt like he'd walked into a trap. "I wanted to discuss some concerns about package deliveries in the neighborhood." Patricia leaned forward. "Is this about your harassment complaints against me? Because I've already documented everything." A murmur went through the room. David felt his face getting hot. "Harassment? I'm the one being harassed. You've been stealing my packages." "That's a serious accusation," Gerald said. "Do you have any proof?" David pulled out his phone and showed them the video footage. "I have clear video evidence of Patricia taking packages from my porch." Gerald watched the video for about 10 seconds before handing the phone back. "What I see is Patricia checking on a package that was left unattended. She's been looking out for this neighborhood for 20 years. If she moved a package, I'm sure she had a good reason." "She didn't move it to protect it," David said, his voice rising. "She stole it. She took it to her house and kept it." "Did you ask her about it?" asked Carol, another board member. "Yes, she denied taking it even though I showed her the video." Patricia spoke up. "I tried to explain to him that I was protecting his package from theft, but he became very aggressive and accusatory. I was actually doing him a favor." David couldn't believe what he was hearing. "A favor? Then where's my package?" "I returned it to the delivery company because it was left unattended for too long," Patricia said smoothly. "I thought that was the responsible thing to do." Several people in the room nodded approvingly. David realized that Patricia had already told her version of the story to everyone, and they believed her. "The real issue here," Patricia continued, "is that David has been hostile toward me since the day he moved in. I've been trying to help him understand our community standards, but instead of being grateful, he's been confrontational and accusatory." Gerald nodded. "Patricia, didn't you mention there have been other issues?" Patricia pulled out a folder thick with papers. "Unfortunately, yes. David has violated several HOA rules since moving in. His grass has been too long on multiple occasions. His trash can was left out past the pickup time. His car has been parked improperly. I've tried to address these issues diplomatically, but he seems to think the rules don't apply to him." David felt like he was in a nightmare. Those violations started after I confronted her about stealing my packages. She's retaliating against me. Or, said Gerald, you're making false accusations because you don't like being held accountable for rule violations. The room erupted in murmurs of agreement. David looked around at all the faces staring at him with suspicion and disapproval. These people had already made up their minds about him. I've lived in this community for 8 years, said a woman David didn't recognize. Patricia has always looked out for everyone. She's prevented multiple break-ins and kept property values high. I find it hard to believe she would steal packages. Especially, added another resident, when the new neighbor has already shown a pattern of not following community rules. David tried one more time. I have video evidence. Clear footage of her taking my property. Gerald held up his hand. We've seen your video, and frankly, it could be interpreted several different ways. What we can't ignore is Patricia's 20-year track record of service to this community versus your month-long track record of complaints and rule violations. Patricia leaned back in her chair with a satisfied smile. I think what David needs to understand is that we all have to follow the same rules here. No one gets special treatment. The meeting moved on to other business. David sat there for another hour, listening to discussions about landscaping budgets and pool maintenance. Every few minutes, someone would glance at him like he was a troublemaker who didn't belong. When the meeting ended, David was the first person out the door. He could hear people talking about him as he left. Poor Patricia, having to deal with that. Some people just don't understand how things work in a nice neighborhood. I hope he doesn't become a problem. David drove home feeling defeated. The system that was supposed to protect him had completely failed. Worse, Patricia had somehow turned herself into the victim and him into the aggressor. The next morning, David found another violation notice on his door. This time it was for having a non-conforming doormat. His doormat was black instead of brown or tan, which apparently violated the community's aesthetic standards. David called the police again, but this time he got Officer Martinez, who'd responded to his first call. You again, Martinez said when he saw David. Let me guess, more package problems? David showed him the new violation notice. She's clearly retaliating against me for reporting the theft. Martinez barely looked at the notice. Getting a citation for your doormat isn't exactly police business, that's between you and the HOA. But it's harassment, David insisted. She's abusing her position to target me. Look, Martinez said, I'm going to be straight with you. You're new to this neighborhood and you're already causing waves. Patricia's been here forever, and nobody else has problems with her. Maybe. You need to think about whether you're the common denominator here. David felt like he'd been slapped. You think I'm making this up? I think you moved into a community with rules, and instead of following them, you're looking for someone to blame. Maybe try being a better neighbor instead of trying to get your neighbor arrested. After Martinez left, David sat on his couch staring at the violation notice. He was being gaslit by everyone. Patricia was stealing from him. The HOA was protecting her, and the police were treating him like a nuisance. His friend Rico came over that evening with pizza and beer. This is insane, Rico said after David filled him in on the HOA meeting. But it's not surprising. HOAs can be like little dictatorships, especially when someone's been in power for a long time. So what am I supposed to do? Just let her keep stealing from me? Rico thought for a moment. The system isn't working because she's got too much influence. The HOA protects her and the cops don't want to get involved in neighbor disputes. You need to change the game. What do you mean? Right now she holds all the cards. She's got the HOA board, she's got community support, and she knows exactly how far she can push without facing real consequences. You need to make the cost of stealing from you higher than the benefit. David wasn't sure what Rico meant, but he was tired of being the victim. Patricia had declared war on him from day one, and now she was stealing his property and using her position to harass him legally. Maybe it was time to stop playing defense. The next day, David went shopping. He bought several small, cheap items online and had them shipped to his house. He wanted to see just how brazen Patricia was willing to. Over the next week, Patricia stole every single package. She'd even started taking them during the day when she knew David was home. She would walk across the street, wave at his doorbell camera, take his package, and walk back to her house like she owned everything on the block. David realized that Patricia wasn't just stealing packages. She was sending him a message. She was showing him that she could do whatever she wanted, and nobody was going to stop her. But David was done being intimidated. If the system wouldn't protect him, he'd have to protect himself. David spent 3 days researching his options. He looked into private security cameras, hiring a lawyer, even considered moving out of the neighborhood entirely. But none of those solutions felt right. They were all defensive moves that would cost him money and stress, while Patricia faced no consequences. Then he remembered something his grandfather used to say. Sometimes you have to fight fire with fire, but make sure you're not the one who gets burned. David needed a solution that was completely legal, but would make Patricia think twice about stealing his packages. He started researching online, looking for creative ways people had dealt with package thieves. That's when he found the forums. There were entire communities of people who dealt with package theft. Some used decoy packages filled with glitter. Others used loud alarms. But one story caught David's attention. A man in Texas had filled a fake package with something that would make the thief never want to steal again. The key was making sure everything was perfectly legal. David couldn't set any traps that might hurt someone or damage property. But he could make the experience of opening his package extremely unpleasant. David started making phone calls. His first call was to his college roommate Jake, who now worked as a wildlife biologist. "Skunk scent," Jake said when David explained what he was looking for. "It's the most powerful smell in nature, and it's completely non-toxic. We use it sometimes for research purposes." "Can I get some legally?" David asked. "Sure, if you have a legitimate educational or research purpose. There are companies that sell it to wildlife researchers and educators. Fair warning, though. This stuff is incredibly potent. Even a tiny amount will smell up an entire house for days." David smiled for the first time in weeks. "That's exactly what I'm looking for." Jake connected David with a company that supplied wildlife research materials. David told them he was conducting a home security experiment and needed skunk scent for educational purposes. It wasn't technically a lie. While he waited for his order to arrive, David started planning. He needed to create a package that would release the scent when opened, but only when opened. He couldn't risk it leaking during shipping or affecting anyone except the person who stole it. David ordered a small jewelry box online and had it shipped to his office instead of his home. He also bought some additional supplies, a small glass vial, cotton balls, and a spring-loaded mechanism that would break the vial when the box was opened. The skunk scent arrived in a package marked "Research Materials, Handle with Extreme Caution." Even through the sealed container, David could smell hints of what was inside. This was going to work perfectly. David spent an entire evening in his garage, wearing gloves and a mask, carefully assembling his trap. The mechanism was simple but effective. When someone opened the jewelry box, a spring would push a small hammer that would break the glass vial inside. The vial contained just enough skunk scent to fill a room with an overwhelming smell. He tested the mechanism several times with water instead of scent to make sure it worked properly. Everything had to be perfect. David also upgraded his camera system. He installed additional hidden cameras around his property to capture every angle of what was about to happen. He wanted to document everything in case the police tried to say he'd done something illegal. The next step was setting up the delivery. David created a fake package using the jewelry box and wrapped it in Amazon packaging. He made it look valuable but not suspicious. Then he arranged for a friend to drop it off at his house at a specific time when he knew Patricia would be watching. On the chosen day, David took a sick day from work. He positioned himself at his upstairs window with a perfect view of both his front porch and Patricia's house. At exactly 2 p.m., his friend Tony drove by and placed the package on David's porch. David had briefed Tony on the plan. "Just put it down and leave quickly," he'd said. "Don't stick around to see what happens." Tony was in and out in under 30 seconds. David watched Patricia's house through binoculars, waiting to see if she'd take the bait. For 20 minutes, nothing happened. David started to worry that maybe Patricia had become suspicious of his recent package deliveries. Maybe she'd figured out he was testing her. Then he saw her front door open. Patricia stepped outside and looked around carefully. She was wearing rubber gloves, which David found uninteresting. She'd apparently decided that stealing packages required some basic precautions. Patricia walked across the street with her usual confidence. She picked up the package, examined it briefly, and headed back to her house. David's heart was pounding as he watched her disappear inside. Now came the waiting game. David had calculated that it would take Patricia about 5 to 10 minutes to take the package somewhere private and open it. He imagined her in her kitchen or garage, carefully cutting through the tape to see what treasure she'd stolen this time. 8 minutes later, David heard a sound he'd never heard before. It was a shriek of pure horror coming from Patricia's house. Then he heard what sounded like someone gagging and coughing. Through his binoculars, David saw Patricia's garage door fly open. She came running out, still wearing her rubber gloves, waving her hands in front of her face. Even from across the street, David could see that she was crying. The smell hit David's house about 30 seconds later. Even though he was 100 feet away with his windows closed, the odor was unbelievable. It was like every skunk in the world had been concentrated into one house and then amplified by 1,000. Patricia ran to her garden hose and started spraying herself down, clothes and all. She was gagging and retching while trying to wash the smell off. But David knew from his research that water would only make it worse. Skunk scent contains sulfur compounds that bond to fabric and skin. Water spreads it around and can actually make the smell stronger. Patricia would need special cleaners and a lot of time to get rid of the odor. David watched as Patricia realized the full scope of her problem. She couldn't go back into her house. The smell had filled the entire building. She stood in her driveway, soaking wet and reeking, looking around helplessly. Other neighbors started coming outside to see what was causing the terrible smell. Mrs. Chen, from 2 houses down, came out holding a towel over her nose. The Johnson family across the street opened their windows to see what was happening, then immediately slammed them shut again. "What is that smell?" David heard someone shout. Patricia was trying to explain, but she was too busy gagging to form complete sentences. David could see her gesturing toward her house and then toward his house, but nobody could get close enough to hear her properly. Tom, David's next-door neighbor, came over and knocked on his door. "David, something's going on across the street. Patricia's house smells like a skunk bomb went off. You might want to close your windows." David played innocent. "Really? I wondered what that smell was. Is she okay? She's outside hosing herself off, but she can't seem to get rid of the smell. I think a skunk might have gotten into her house somehow." David nodded sympathetically. "That's terrible. I hope she can get it cleaned up." As the afternoon went on, the situation got worse for Patricia. A professional odor removal company arrived and told her it would take at least 3 days to make her house livable again. They'd have to bring in industrial fans, ozone generators, and special cleaning chemicals. Patricia spent that night in a hotel, and the next night, and the night after that. The local newspaper even ran a story about the mysterious skunk incident that had forced a woman to evacuate her home. The reporter interviewed neighbors who described the smell as otherworldly and like nothing they'd ever experienced. David kept all his cameras running the entire time, documenting everything. He had footage of Patricia stealing the package, audio of her reaction when she opened it, and video of the aftermath. It was the most comprehensive evidence he could have asked for. But the best part was yet to come. David was about to find out if his plan had worked. The first sign that David's plan had worked came the next morning. Patricia's usual spot by her window was empty. For the first time since he'd moved in, David didn't feel like he was being watched. Patricia was staying at the Comfort Inn on the other side of town, while her house was being treated by the odor removal company. David had heard through Tom that the cleanup was more expensive and complicated than anyone had expected. They told her it might take a full week, Tom said when he stopped by David's house. Apparently, the smell got into her air conditioning system and spread through the whole house. They have to clean the ductwork, replace some carpet, and repaint several rooms. David tried to look sympathetic, but inside he was celebrating. This was exactly the kind of consequence Patricia needed to face. 3 days later, David was working in his home office when he heard a knock at his door. He looked through the peephole and saw 2 police officers standing on his porch. For a moment, his heart stopped. Had Patricia figured out what really happened? David opened the door to find Officer Rodriguez and Detective Walsh, who he'd never met before. "Good morning," Detective Walsh said. "We're investigating a theft report and we'd like to ask you a few questions." "Of course," David said, trying to stay calm. "What can I help you with?" "Your neighbor Patricia reported that someone has been stealing her packages," Rodriguez explained. "She thinks it might be related to the recent incident at her house." David almost laughed out loud. Patricia was now claiming to be a victim of package theft. "I'm sorry to hear that," David said, "but I'm not sure how I can help." Detective Walsh pulled out a notebook. "Patricia mentioned that you two have had some disagreements about HOA rules. She's wondering if you might know anything about the packages or the skunk incident." David looked confused. "Skunk incident?" "Someone apparently left a package containing skunk scent at her house. When she opened it, it created quite a mess. She had to evacuate for several days." "That's terrible," David said. "But why would she think I had anything to do with it?" Rodriguez stepped forward. "She says you've been harassing her and making false accusations about package theft. She thinks this might be some kind of retaliation." David felt his anger rising, but he kept his voice calm. "Officers, I've been the victim of package theft for weeks. I have video evidence that Patricia has been stealing my deliveries. I've reported it multiple times, but nothing was done about it." Detective Walsh looked interested. "You have video evidence?" "Absolutely. Clear footage of Patricia taking packages from my porch on multiple occasions." David led them inside and showed them the camera footage on his laptop. Walsh and Rodriguez watched several clips showing Patricia stealing packages over the past month. "This is pretty clear evidence of theft," Walsh said after watching the videos. "Why wasn't this investigated before?" David shrugged. "I was told it was a neighbor dispute and that I should work it out myself. Officer Martinez responded to my calls, but he didn't seem interested in pursuing charges." Rodriguez looked uncomfortable. "We'll need to review those previous reports." Detective Walsh continued watching the footage. "Do you have video from the day of the skunk incident?" David's pulse quickened, but he nodded. "Yes, I have cameras, running all the time now because of the theft problem." He showed them the footage from that day. The video clearly showed Patricia stealing the package and taking it to her house. 8 minutes later, audio captured her screaming reaction. "So, she stole another one of your packages," Walsh observed. "And this time there happened to be skunk scent inside?" "I guess so," David said carefully. "I don't know what was in that package. I order a lot of different things for work." Walsh looked at his notes. "What kind of work do you do that requires skunk scent?" David had prepared for this question. "I'm a software developer, but I also do some wildlife photography as a hobby. I'd ordered some research materials to learn about animal behavior. I had no idea Patricia would steal that package too. It wasn't technically a lie. David had ordered the materials for research purposes, just not the kind of research the detective was thinking about." Rodriguez was still watching the video footage. "So Patricia has been stealing your packages for weeks, and when she stole one that happened to contain something unpleasant, she called us to report you for harassment." "That's what it looks like," David said. Detective Walsh closed his notebook. "Mr. David, based on this evidence, we're going to need to speak with Patricia about the package thefts. As for the skunk incident, if you legitimately ordered those materials and Patricia stole them, then she's responsible for whatever happened when she opened your property." After the officers left, David felt a mixture of relief and satisfaction. His plan had worked perfectly, and now Patricia was about to face the consequences she'd avoided for so long. 2 hours later, David watched through his window as police cars pulled up to the hotel where Patricia was staying. She came out in handcuffs. The local news picked up the story that evening. "HOA official arrested for package theft" was the headline. The reporter explained that Patricia had been charged with multiple counts of theft after video evidence showed her stealing packages from a neighbor's porch over several weeks. The story got even better when other neighbors started coming forward. It turned out that Patricia had been taking liberties with more than just David's packages. Several residents reported missing deliveries and suspicious behavior from their HOA compliance officer. The HOA board held an emergency meeting and voted to remove Patricia from her position immediately. Gerald, the HOA president, issued a formal apology to David and announced that all of Patricia's recent citations against him were being dropped. "We had no idea this was happening," Gerald told the local newspaper. "If we had known about the theft, we never would have supported Patricia's complaints against Mr. David. We sincerely apologize for not investigating his concerns properly." Officer Martinez also faced questions about why he hadn't taken David's initial report seriously. The department announced they would be reviewing their procedures for handling neighbor disputes and ensuring that video evidence was properly evaluated. Patricia's house took 2 full weeks to become livable again. The skunk scent had been so concentrated that it damaged furniture, rugs, and even some electrical equipment. Her insurance company initially refused to cover the damage, saying it resulted from criminal activity. When Patricia finally returned home, she was a different person. Gone was the confident, controlling woman who had made David's life miserable. She avoided eye contact when she saw him and never approached his property again. David's packages stopped disappearing immediately. In fact, he noticed that delivery drivers seemed more careful about placing packages securely, probably because the story had made local news and everyone knew about the theft problem. 6 months later, David was working in his front yard when Tom came over with some surprising news. "Patricia's selling her house," Tom said. "I heard she can't afford the legal fees and the house repairs. Plus, I don't think she's comfortable in the neighborhood anymore." David nodded. "I can understand that. You know," Tom continued, "I owe you an apology. When you first moved in and had those problems with Patricia, I thought maybe you were just being difficult. I didn't realize she was actually stealing from you. I should have believed you." "It's okay," David said. "The important thing is that it's resolved now." A month later, Patricia's house sold to a young couple with 2 small children. David introduced himself and welcomed them to the neighborhood. They seemed nice and normal, nothing like the previous owner. David never told anyone exactly what had been in that package. When people asked about the skunk incident, he just said it was an unfortunate coincidence that Patricia happened to steal a package containing wildlife research materials. The truth was, David had learned something important about justice. Sometimes the system fails, and sometimes people in power abuse their positions. But that doesn't mean you have to be a victim forever. David's solution had been creative, completely legal, and perfectly proportional to the crime. Patricia had faced real consequences for her actions while David had never broken a single law. Most importantly, David could finally enjoy his dream home in peace. His packages arrived safely, his lawn met HOA standards without harassment, and he could work from home without feeling like he was under surveillance. Sometimes, David thought, the best revenge isn't getting mad or getting even. It's making sure the other person learns a lesson they'll never forget. And based on the smell that still occasionally drifted from Patricia's old house on hot summer days, he was pretty sure she'd learned that lesson.